Our constituents, of course, have rightly been enraged by the proposed sale by Permanent TSB of 18,000 distressed mortgages to unregulated Vulture funds. And those loans, of course, include 14,000 family homes and are said to be valued at 3.7 billion. The so-called Project Loss reminds us that nearly 49,000 mortgages are now held by non-bank lenders and that more than half of receiverships are now initiated by Vulture funds. Like other deputies, I've experienced making contact with credit intermediaries of these funds on behalf of families in acute distress at the prospect of losing their homes. And we recently, of course, heard the experience of Mr. Charlie Weston of the Irish Independent. But going on the track record of Vulture funds and their agents, I believe that the sale of home mortgage-backed securities should simply be banned by legislation. While the takeover of a whole bank or building society by another similar entity is a long-standing feature of capitalist economies, most of our constituents believe, and I agree with them, that the bundling and sale of home loans into speculative instruments is an outrage and should be ended. And of course, we saw that flourishing in this country when Mr McCreevy and Mr Ahern were running the state and, in fact, running it over a cliff. But that's not the subject, the banning of the mortgage-backed securities. It's not the subject of this fairly feeble bill introduced here tonight by Deputy Michael McGrath and Fianna Fáil, and of course apparently now supported by their partners in government, Fine Gael. It's also laughable and highly ironic that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, the parties which left us at the mercy of Vulture funds, you remember Morgan Kelly at the mercy of strangers from 2007-2008, are now sponsoring and supporting the legislation. And throughout those barren austerity years from 2008, of course, I watched Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael deputies, including Deputy McGrath, troop together into the yes lobbies to wreck our national finances, our banks and our households. And Deputy Michael Noonan in particular bears a shocking responsibility for the situation of the sale of so much of our country and for the position the 14,000 permanent TSB home mortgage holders are now faced with. Indeed, it was he and the Kenny Gilmore government which greatly accelerated the sale of Irish property assets to vultures after the Davos World Economic Forum in 2014, when NAMA was ordered to rapidly dispose of its remaining 22 billion loan book. And we started hearing and becoming more familiar with names like Caravel, Cerberus, Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, Apollo and Lone Star, etc. And of course, the human cost of families and individuals with split or distressed mortgages already sold or threatened with sale to Vulture funds can never be underestimated. Most frustrating of all, of course, are households who tried so hard to engage with one of the pillar banks and found that the bank refused to engage with them. So I fear that this legislation will in reality do little enough to protect those families and to keep them in their homes. The Minister for Finance and the Governor of the Central Bank have the key responsibilities for the welfare of those citizens, and I note that the courts have so far generally played a positive role in keeping people in their homes. The redefinition by the Central Bank and the ECB of performing loans to include split mortgages would be a huge step forward and give permanent TSB an alternative route to viability. And I note the letter which Deputy McGrath published tonight on Twitter. A huge expansion of the mortgage to rent scheme, of course, would also be very positive, and we've all been impressed by the programme, of course, of David Hall's iCare and his arrangement with AIB. But given the public rescue of the pillar banks, we should also require them to work closely together to improve all their liquidity ratios. Most of all, though, we must ensure that those banks and other mortgage holders, that PTSB, AIB, Ulster and the other mortgage holders do not put their home mortgage holders at the mercy of rapacious foreign Vulture funds.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ken. Thank you for sticking to